The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Isabella Chen adjusted her diamond bracelet for the third time that evening. She had spent over 2 hours preparing for this dinner party, ensuring every detail of her appearance screamed wealth and sophistication. Her silk Valentino gown hugged her petite frame perfectly, and her freshly styled hair was swept into an elegant chignon that had cost more than most people earned in a week. Tonight's gathering at her Malibu estate wasn't just another social event, it was a carefully orchestrated display of power designed to impress the city's most influential business leaders and secure her position as the undisputed queen of Los Angeles high society. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Isabella's fingers drummed impatiently against her champagne flute as she surveyed the opulent dining room one final time. Everything had to be perfect. The imported roses from Ecuador adorned every surface, their deep crimson petals complementing the gold-leafed wallpaper that had been hand-painted by artisans from Florence. The mahogany dining table, which could seat 24 guests comfortably, gleamed under the warm light of 3 matching chandeliers, each worth more than a luxury car. Tonight she was hosting Senator Patricia Whitmore, tech mogul Jonathan Blackstone, and several other power players whose endorsements could catapult her late husband's real estate empire to unprecedented heights. The doorbell's melodious chime echoed through the sprawling mansion, and Isabella's heart quickened with anticipation. Her guests were beginning to arrive, and she needed everything to run seamlessly. She had hired additional staff for the evening, including several temporary workers from an upscale catering service, to ensure that every glass remained full and every plate was cleared the moment it was empty. Among these temporary workers was a young woman named Camila Rodriguez, though Isabella had barely noticed her during the brief staff meeting earlier that afternoon. Camila stood quietly in the corner of the kitchen, smoothing down her crisp black uniform dress and adjusting the white apron that marked her as part of the serving staff. At 26 years old, she possessed a natural grace that seemed almost out of place in her current role. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her warm brown eyes held a depth that suggested experiences far beyond her years. She moved with careful precision, having learned long ago that invisibility was often the key to survival in environments where she didn't belong. What the other staff members didn't know, and what Isabella Chen certainly couldn't have imagined, was that Camila had once been on the fast track to becoming one of the world's most celebrated concert pianists. 5 years earlier she had been a rising star at the prestigious Berklee College of Music in Boston, where her professors had marveled at her ability to breathe life into even the most technically demanding pieces. Her performances of Rachmaninoff and Chopin had brought audiences to tears, and several prominent critics had predicted that she would one day grace the stages of Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House. But life, as Camila had learned in the cruelest possible way, rarely follows the path we envision. The phone call had come during her junior year, in the middle of preparing for her senior recital. Her younger sister Sophia, barely 18 and just starting her freshman year at UCLA, had been diagnosed with a rare form of brain cancer. The doctors had given her 6 months to live without immediate and extensive treatment that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and wasn't fully covered by their family's modest insurance plan. Without hesitation, Camila had withdrawn from Berklee, selling her beloved Steinway baby grand piano, a graduation gift from her grandparents who had saved for decades to buy it, to help pay for Sophia's first surgery. She had moved back to Los Angeles, taking whatever job she could find to contribute to the mounting medical bills. For the past 5 years, she had worked as a house cleaner, a retail assistant, a restaurant server, and now, occasionally, as temporary help for high-end catering companies. Each job was chosen for its flexibility, allowing her to be available for Sophia's frequent hospital appointments and lengthy treatment sessions. The irony wasn't lost on Camila that she now spent her evenings serving champagne to people who could afford her sister's entire treatment plan without thinking twice about the cost. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to exist in these spaces of extreme wealth without allowing herself to feel bitter or resentful. Her sister needed her to be strong, to be practical, to focus on what truly mattered. Music had become a luxury she couldn't afford, both financially and emotionally. The few times she had tried to play piano in the years since leaving school, the pain of what she had lost had been almost unbearable. Tonight's dinner party was particularly important, according to the head server who had briefed the temporary staff. Mrs. Chen was expecting approximately 30 guests, all of whom were accustomed to the finest service and wouldn't tolerate any mistakes. Camilla had worked similar events before and knew the drill: move quietly, speak only when spoken to, and under no circumstances should she draw attention to herself. She was there to be functional, not noticed. As the evening progressed, Camilla moved through the elegant rooms with practiced efficiency. She offered champagne and hors d'oeuvres to guests who barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations flowing around her like water around a stone. She listened to discussions about stock portfolios, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and business deals worth millions of dollars. These were people who inhabited a world where money was no object, where problems could be solved with a simple phone call or wire transfer. Isabella Chen commanded the room with the confidence of someone born into privilege. Her voice carried above the others as she regaled her guests with stories of her recent trip to Monaco and her plans to acquire a historic hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She moved from group to group with the skill of a seasoned politician, ensuring that each guest felt important and valued. Her laughter was perfectly timed, her compliments strategically delivered, and her attention distributed with mathematical precision. Camilla found herself assigned to the main dining room, where the most important guests were seated for the evening's formal dinner. The conversation topics ranged from the latest art acquisitions to upcoming charity galas, with occasional discussions about business ventures and political developments. She refilled water glasses and cleared empty plates with mechanical efficiency, her mind drifting to Sophia, who was at home watching Netflix and probably falling asleep on the couch. Her sister's energy levels had improved significantly over the past year thanks to a new treatment protocol that had cost them everything they had managed to save, plus money they had borrowed from relatives. The dining room was a masterpiece of interior design, with hand-painted murals depicting scenes from classical mythology adorning the walls. Persian rugs covered portions of the marble floor, and original paintings by renowned artists hung in gilt frames between the windows. But what caught Camilla's attention, despite her best efforts to remain focused on her work, was the magnificent Bosendorfer concert grand piano positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The piano was a work of art in itself, its ebony surface so perfectly polished that it reflected the room's ambient lighting like a black mirror. Camilla recognized it immediately as a Vienna model, probably worth close to $200,000. She had played on a similar instrument once during a master class in college, and she remembered how incredibly responsive the keys had been, how the sound had seemed to fill not just the room but her entire soul. The sight of it sitting there, undoubtedly more for show than for actual music making, created a tight knot of longing in her chest. Isabella's voice cut through Camilla's momentary distraction. "More wine for Senator Whitmore, please." The command was delivered without eye contact, as if Camilla were simply another piece of furniture in the room. She quickly moved to fulfill the request, refilling the senator's glass with the vintage Bordeaux that probably cost more per bottle than Camilla earned in a week. As the evening wore on, the conversation grew louder and more animated, fueled by increasingly expensive wines and the comfort of being surrounded by like-minded individuals. Isabella regaled the table with the story of her recent acquisition of a rare painting, describing in detail how she had outbid several museums to secure the piece for her private collection. The guests murmured their approval and admiration, feeding her ego with practiced ease. It was during the dessert course that disaster struck. Camilla was carrying a tray of delicate crystal glasses filled with champagne, moving carefully between the chairs to serve the final toast of the evening. Senator Whitmore, gesturing emphatically while making a point about urban development, suddenly pushed his chair back without warning. The movement was swift and unexpected, and despite Camilla's quick reflexes, she couldn't avoid the collision. The tray tilted in her hands, and she watched in horror as several glasses of champagne cascaded onto Isabella Chen's pristine white silk dress. The golden liquid spread across the expensive fabric like a stain of shame, and the room fell into shocked silence. Every eye turned to witness the disaster, and Camilla felt her face burn with embarrassment and terror. Isabella's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She leaped from her chair, staring down at her ruined dress with a mixture of shock and fury that seemed to fill the entire room. The champagne had soaked through the delicate fabric, creating dark patches that stood out starkly against the pure white silk. Her carefully applied makeup began to show signs of strain as her face flushed with anger. "Look what you've done." Isabella's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered crystal. "This dress is Valentino. Do you have any idea what this cost? Do you have any concept of what you've just destroyed?" Camilla felt her knees go weak. She set down what remained of the tray with shaking hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen. It was an accident." The senator moved his chair and I couldn't. "I don't want to hear excuses." Isabella cut her off sharply. "This dress cost $15,000. $15,000, that's probably more than you make in 6 months, you clumsy girl." The other guests watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Some seemed genuinely sympathetic to Camilla's plight, while others appeared to be enjoying the drama. Senator Whitmore, who had actually caused the accident, remained conspicuously silent, making no effort to take responsibility for his role in the incident. Camilla's mind raced as she tried to process what $15,000 meant in terms of her current financial reality. It represented months of work, money that could have gone towards Sophia's upcoming MRI scan, funds that could have helped them get ahead instead of constantly falling behind. The weight of the accident pressed down on her like a physical force. "I'll pay for it," Camilla said quietly, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew how impossible they were. "I'll find a way to replace it or pay for the cleaning." Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was cold and cruel, designed to humiliate. "Pay for it? With what money? You're a maid, a servant. You probably live in some tiny apartment and take the bus to work. You couldn't afford to dry clean this dress, let alone replace it." The accuracy of Isabella's assessment stung because it was largely true. Camilla did live in a small apartment with Sophia, and she did take public transportation to most of her jobs. But the dismissive way Isabella spoke about her circumstances, as if being working class was something to be ashamed of, ignited a spark of defiance that Camilla had kept buried for years. "You're right," Camilla said, lifting her chin slightly. "I can't afford to replace your dress immediately, but I'm not just a maid, I'm a person, and I'm doing my best in a difficult situation." Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously. The audacity of this servant to speak back to her, to show any hint of pride or dignity in her position, was intolerable. She looked around the room at her guests, many of whom were watching the exchange with growing discomfort, and decided to make an example that would entertain them and firmly establish the social hierarchy. "You want to prove you're more than just a clumsy maid?" Isabella asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Fine, let's see what other talents you might have hiding underneath that uniform." She gestured dramatically toward the piano. "Play something for us."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Show my guests that you're more than just someone who spills drinks and breaks things." The request hit Camilla like a physical blow. The piano sat there beautiful and intimidating, representing everything she had lost and everything she could never have again. The thought of touching those keys in front of these people, of exposing the most vulnerable part of herself to their judgment and ridicule, made her feel physically ill. "I don't play piano," she lied, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Isabella's smile was predatory. "Oh, I think you're being modest. Everyone can play a little something. Chopsticks, perhaps. Mary had a little lamb. Surely even someone with your background learned something in elementary school music class." The laughter from some of the guests was like salt in an open wound. They were enjoying this spectacle, this demonstration of power and privilege over someone they viewed as inherently inferior. Camilla could feel their eyes on her, could sense their anticipation for her humiliation. "Play," Isabella commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Consider it your payment for ruining my dress. Entertain my guests and maybe I won't report this incident to your agency. Maybe I won't make sure you never work another high-end event in this city." Camilla looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Some showed curiosity, others displayed barely concealed amusement, and a few seemed genuinely uncomfortable with Isabella's behavior. But none of them spoke up on her behalf. None of them questioned whether this public humiliation was appropriate or necessary. She thought about Sophia at home, probably asleep on the couch with their cat Mochi curled up beside her. Her sister's next treatment was scheduled for the following week, and they needed every dollar Camilla could earn. If Isabella followed through on her threat to blacklist her from catering work, it could have serious consequences for their financial stability. They were already living paycheck to paycheck, and losing this income stream could be devastating. But as Camilla looked at the piano, something stirred deep inside her chest. It wasn't just fear or embarrassment she was feeling, it was grief. Grief for the dreams she had abandoned, for the music that had once filled her life with purpose and joy, for the future she had sacrificed to save the person she loved most in the world. The piano represented everything she had lost, but it also represented everything she had once been. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory as she remembered the feeling of keys beneath her touch, the way a perfect phrase could send shivers down her spine, the transcendent moments when music became something more than sound. It became pure emotion made audible. She had tried so hard to bury that part of herself, to convince herself that she could live without music, but standing here in front of this beautiful instrument, she realized that the musician in her had never truly died. It had simply been waiting, dormant, but not destroyed. "All right," Camila said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I'll play something." Isabella clapped her hands together with theatrical delight. "Wonderful, everyone gather around. Let's see what our little maid can do with a real piano." The guests began to move closer, some with genuine curiosity, and others with the gleeful anticipation of witnessing a train wreck. Camila walked slowly toward the piano, each step feeling like it took an eternity. The Bosendorfer loomed larger as she approached, its pristine surface reflecting her nervous face back at her. She sat down on the bench and adjusted its height with muscle memory that surprised her. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and she could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching her every move. The room had fallen completely silent, except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Camila closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed in her expression. The nervous apologetic servant was still there, but underneath something stronger was beginning to surface. Her fingers came to rest on the keys, and she made her choice. She began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. The first notes floated through the air like drops of liquid moonlight, soft and ethereal. Camila's touch was so delicate that the sound seemed to materialize from nowhere, filling the room with a beauty that was almost supernatural. Her left hand provided a gentle foundation while her right hand sang the melody with a tenderness that brought immediate tears to several guests' eyes. But this wasn't the hesitant amateur performance Isabella had expected to mock. This was the work of someone who understood music not just technically, but emotionally and spiritually. Every phrase was shaped with intention, every dynamic change served a purpose, and every moment of silence was as meaningful as every note played. As the piece unfolded, Camila felt herself transforming. The scared, humiliated servant began to fade away, replaced by the artist she had always been underneath. Her posture straightened, her movements became more confident, and her connection to the music grew stronger with each passing measure. This was who she really was, who she had always been, even when the world had forced her to hide it. The room had become a temple of sound, and Camila was its priestess. The guests who had come expecting to witness a public humiliation, instead found themselves in the presence of something sacred. The laughter and anticipatory smirks had vanished, replaced by expressions of wonder and growing realization that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Isabella's own expression had undergone a dramatic transformation. The cruel smile had disappeared, replaced by shock and something that might have been shame. She had expected to destroy this young woman's dignity, to provide entertainment for her guests at Camila's expense. Instead, she found herself confronted with undeniable evidence that she had gravely underestimated the person she had been treating as less than human. Camila's performance of Clair de Lune was flawless, but more than that, it was transcendent. She played with the kind of musicality that couldn't be taught in any classroom, the kind of natural talent that appeared perhaps once in a generation. Her technical skills were evident in her perfect control and effortless execution, but it was her emotional intelligence and artistic maturity that truly set her apart. As the final notes of the Debussy piece faded into silence, the room remained frozen in stunned quietude. No one seemed to know how to respond to what they had just witnessed. The transformation from clumsy servant to masterful artist had been so complete and unexpected that it challenged everything they thought they knew about social hierarchies and human worth. Then slowly, someone began to clap. It was Senator Whitmore, the man whose careless movement had started this entire chain of events. His applause was slow and deliberate, filled with genuine respect and perhaps a touch of guilt. Others joined in gradually, until the entire room was filled with the sound of sincere appreciation. But Camila wasn't finished. Something had awakened in her during those few minutes at the piano, something that had been sleeping for far too long. She looked up at Isabella, who was still standing frozen in shock, her expensive dress forgotten. "You asked me to entertain your guests," Camilla said, her voice now carrying a confidence that hadn't been there before. "But I think they deserve better than chopsticks." Without waiting for permission, she began her second piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, third movement. But she played it as a solo arrangement, her own transcription that she had created years ago as a student project. This was music that demanded everything from a performer: technical brilliance, emotional depth, and the kind of stamina that could only come from years of serious training. The opening notes exploded from the piano like a declaration of war against mediocrity. This wasn't gentle moonlight anymore, this was fire and lightning, passion and power unleashed without apology. Camilla's hands flew across the keys with stunning precision, her entire body becoming an instrument of musical expression. She leaned into the dramatic passages, her face reflecting the emotional intensity of the music, and pulled back for the tender moments with exquisite control. The guests stood transfixed, many of them having never heard live piano performance of this caliber outside of a concert hall. This was the kind of playing that reminded people why music was considered one of humanity's greatest achievements, why composers throughout history had dedicated their lives to creating these monuments of sound and emotion. Isabella found herself unable to look away, despite the growing realization of how badly she had misjudged the situation. This young woman wasn't just talented, she was professionally trained, possibly at the highest level. The ease with which she navigated the technical challenges of the Rachmaninoff, the musical intelligence evident in her phrasing choices, the sheer emotional power of her performance, these weren't the qualities of an amateur who had learned to play as a hobby. As Camilla played, her own story began to unfold in the music. The struggles of the past 5 years, the sacrifice of her dreams, the daily fight to keep her family afloat, all of it poured out through her fingers into the piano. But there was also hope in the music, resilience, and an unshakable core of strength that had kept her going through the darkest times. The technical demands of the piece were enormous, requiring rapid scales, thunderous chords, and delicate melodic passages that could make or break a performance. But Camilla navigated every challenge with the confidence of someone who had once been on track to perform with the world's greatest orchestras. Her muscle memory was intact, despite years away from serious practice, and her musical instincts remained as sharp as ever. When she reached the final triumphant conclusion of the concerto movement, the entire room seemed to exhale collectively. The last chord rang out with such power and authority that the crystal glasses on nearby tables actually resonated in sympathy. Camilla lifted her hands from the keys and sat in silence for a moment, as stunned by her own performance as everyone else in the room. The applause that followed wasn't polite social clapping, it was the kind of ovation usually reserved for world-class concert halls, filled with genuine awe and appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Several guests were openly crying, moved by the unexpected beauty and emotional honesty of the performance. Even the catering staff had stopped their work to listen, drawn by music that transcended all social boundaries. Isabella stood frozen, her champagne-stained dress forgotten, staring at Camilla as if seeing her for the first time. The cruel superiority that had defined her attitude just minutes earlier had evaporated, replaced by something approaching humility. She had planned to humiliate a servant, and instead had been given a master class in the dangers of judging people by their circumstances rather than their character. "Where did you study?" The question came from Dr. Margaret Hoffman, a renowned philanthropist who served on the boards of several major arts organizations. Her voice was filled with genuine curiosity and respect. Camilla took a deep breath before answering. "Berklee College of Music. I was in their classical piano performance program." "Was?" Dr. Hoffman pressed gently. "What happened?" For a moment, Camilla hesitated. The story of her sacrifice was deeply personal, and she wasn't sure she wanted to share it with a room full of strangers. But something about the genuine interest in Dr. Hoffman's voice, and the respectful silence of the other guests, encouraged her to continue. "My sister was diagnosed with brain cancer 5 years ago. The treatments weren't fully covered by insurance, and someone needed to work to help pay for them. I left school to take care of her and earn money for her medical expenses." The room remained silent as the implications of her words sank in. Here was someone who had possessed the talent and training to pursue one of the most demanding artistic careers in the world, and she had given it all up to save a family member's life. The contrast between her sacrifice and the privilege surrounding her could not have been more stark. "And your sister?" Dr. Hoffman asked softly. "She's doing much better now. The treatments have been successful, but they're ongoing. She's actually planning to start college next year, which is something we never thought would be possible." Senator Whitmore, who had remained silent since applauding, finally found his voice. "Miss, I owe you an apology. I'm the one who caused you to spill those drinks. It was my careless movement that started this whole situation, and I should have spoken up immediately." Isabella felt the weight of every eye in the room turning toward her. The senator's acknowledgement of his role in the accident only highlighted her own behavior more starkly. She had known it wasn't entirely Camilla's fault, but she had chosen to blame and humiliate her anyway because it was easier, because it fed her sense of superiority, because she could. Isabella began, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely speechless. "How do you apologize for attempting to destroy someone's dignity? How do you explain that you were so blinded by privilege that you couldn't see the humanity in another person?" Camilla stood up from the piano bench and smoothed down her uniform dress. The transformation was remarkable. She carried herself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew their own worth regardless of what uniform they happened to be wearing. "I should get back to work," she said simply. "There are still glasses to clear and dishes to wash." "No." The word came from Dr. Hoffman, spoken with quiet authority. "You absolutely should not go back to clearing glasses. Not after what we just witnessed." She turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just had the extraordinary privilege of hearing one of the most gifted pianists I've encountered in decades. This young woman has a talent that should be nurtured and celebrated, not hidden away in service jobs." Dr. Hoffman pulled a business card from her purse and approached Camilla. "I run the Hoffman Foundation for Musical Arts. We provide scholarships and support for talented musicians who face financial barriers. I would very much like to discuss your situation with you." Other guests began to murmur among themselves, and several more approached Camilla with their own offers of help and connections. Jonathan Blackstone mentioned his ties to the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Another guest spoke about recording opportunities. The woman who had been silent all evening revealed herself to be a talent manager for classical musicians. But Isabella remained frozen, watching this outpouring of support for the young woman she had tried to humiliate. The realization of what she had almost cost the world, and what she had revealed about her own character was beginning to sink in with uncomfortable clarity. The evening continued for another hour, but the focus had shifted entirely. Camilla found herself at the center of conversations about her musical background, her sister's health, and her dreams for the future. The guests who had barely noticed her presence at the beginning of the evening, now hung on her every word with genuine interest and respect. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, many of them made sure to speak privately with Camilla, offering contact information and specific ways they might be able to help. Dr. Hoffman spent nearly 20 minutes discussing the details of her foundation's programs, and how they might be able to support both Camilla's return to music and her sister's ongoing medical needs. Isabella stood at the edge of these conversations, still in her stained dress, watching the young woman she had tried to destroy become the most celebrated person in her own home. The irony was not lost on her, but more than that, she was beginning to understand the profound ugliness of her own behavior, and the beautiful strength of Camilla's character. When the last guest had left and the catering staff were packing up their supplies, Isabella finally approached Camilla, who was helping to fold tablecloths despite protests from the other workers that she had done enough for one evening. "Camilla," Isabella said quietly, using her name for the first time that night, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Camilla looked up, her expression neutral but not hostile. She nodded and followed Isabella to a quiet corner of the dining room, near the piano that had changed everything. "I owe you an apology," Isabella began, her voice lacking its earlier commanding tone. "More than an apology, I owe you an explanation, though I'm not sure I can explain something I don't fully understand myself." Camilla waited silently, her hands folded in front of her. "When I saw that dress get ruined, I felt angry and embarrassed in front of my guests. But instead of handling it like a reasonable adult, I chose to take it out on you because I could. Because you were in a position where you couldn't fight back, or at least I thought you couldn't. Isabella paused, struggling with words that were unfamiliar to her. Genuine contrition was not a language she spoke fluently. I made assumptions about you based on your job, your uniform, your position in my home. I decided you were less than me, less worthy of respect and dignity, and I was so completely utterly wrong, that it's going to take me a long time to fully process it. Camilla's expression softened slightly, but she still didn't speak. You have a gift that most people can only dream of possessing. More than that, you have a strength and grace that I clearly lack. You sacrificed your dreams to save your sister's life, and then when I tried to humiliate you, you turned it into something beautiful that inspired everyone in this room. Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook. I know this doesn't fix what I did, but I want to contribute to your sister's medical expenses, and I want to replace your piano, the one you sold to pay for her treatments. Camilla finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Chen, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need your money to validate my worth. What happened tonight validated that just fine. Please, Isabella insisted, let me do this, not because you need me to, but because I need to do something meaningful to start making up for who I was tonight. Dr. Hoffman's foundation sounds wonderful, but foundations take time. Your sister needs help now, and you deserve to have music back in your life immediately. Camilla studied Isabella's face, searching for sincerity. What she found was a woman confronting some uncomfortable truths about herself, genuinely trying to make amends for behavior she was clearly ashamed of. All right, Camilla said finally, but not as payment for what happened tonight. If you want to help, do it because you believe music and healing are worth supporting, not because you feel guilty. Isabella nodded, writing out a check that would cover several months of Sophia's treatments. As she handed it to Camilla, she said, I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me for how I treated you, and I hope even more that you'll get back to making music full-time. The world needs artists like you. Camilla folded the check and put it in her pocket, then extended her hand to Isabella. Mrs. Chen, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them. As Camilla prepared to leave, Isabella watched her with something approaching awe. This young woman had just demonstrated more grace and maturity in the face of cruelty than Isabella had shown in decades of privilege. The lesson would not be lost on her. The next morning, Camilla woke up in her small apartment to find her phone buzzing with messages and missed calls. Dr. Hoffman had already sent detailed information about her foundation's programs. The talent manager had forwarded contacts at 3 major record labels. Senator Whitmore's office had called to discuss performing at a charity fundraiser. Her life, which had been stable but limited for 5 years, was suddenly filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. But the most important call was from the hospital. Sophia's latest tests showed continued improvement, and the doctor was optimistic that they could reduce the frequency of her treatments within the next 6 months. The young woman who had sacrificed everything for her sister's health was finally seeing the light at the end of a very long tunnel. 3 months later, Camila Rodriguez made her return to the concert stage at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, performing as a featured soloist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. The audience included many faces from that night at Isabella's house, but the most important person in attendance was Sophia, healthy and radiant, sitting in the front row with tears of pride streaming down her face. Isabella Chen was there too, but not in the VIP section she could have easily afforded. She sat in the regular seats, having learned that your position in the theater mattered far less than your ability to truly hear the music being played. She had discovered that listening, really listening, was a skill she had never developed, and she was working hard to change that. As Camila's fingers danced across the keys of another magnificent piano, this time in celebration rather than desperation, the audience was transported by music that spoke of sacrifice and love, of dreams deferred and ultimately reclaimed. It was the sound of a human spirit that had been tested but never broken, of talent that had been buried but never destroyed. The standing ovation lasted for 10 minutes, and when it finally ended, Camila looked out into the audience and smiled. She had learned that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can become doorways to the best moments, and that our truest strength often emerges not when we're comfortable, but when we're forced to defend our dignity and worth. From the stage of one of the world's most prestigious concert halls, the former maid who had been challenged to play piano looked out at a sea of faces and knew that she had found her way home to the music that had always been her true calling. And in the audience, Isabella Chen sat quietly, still learning how to listen, still working to become worthy of the lesson in grace and strength that Camila had given her that unforgettable night. The morning after the Walt Disney Concert Hall performance brought a cascade of opportunities that would have overwhelmed Camila just months earlier. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from agents, recording studios and concert promoters who had either attended the performance or heard about it through the classical music community's remarkably efficient grapevine. But Camila had learned to be selective about the voices she chose to amplify in her life, and she found herself drawn most strongly to the quieter, more thoughtful conversations. Dr. Margaret Hoffman had arranged to meet Camila at a small cafe in Beverly Hills, far from the glitz and glamour that might have once intimidated her. The older woman arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained what she described as a comprehensive plan for Camila's artistic development. Over perfectly brewed coffee and artisanal pastries that neither of them touched, Dr. Hoffman outlined a vision that went far beyond simple performance opportunities. "What I'm proposing isn't just a return to your previous trajectory," Dr. Hoffman explained, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the cafe windows. "That path was interrupted, yes, but the interruption has given you something invaluable that most classical musicians never acquire." Camila looked puzzled, setting down her coffee cup with careful precision. "What do you mean?" "Life experience, authentic human struggle. The ability to connect with music not just technically but emotionally, spiritually, viscerally." Dr. Hoffman leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Most concert pianists are technically proficient, but they play music as an intellectual exercise. You play it as if your life depends on it, because for 5 years it did." The foundation Dr. Hoffman represented was unlike the typical arts patronage organizations that focused primarily on young prodigies still in their teens. The Hoffman Foundation specifically sought out artists who had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control but who possessed the maturity and depth that came from overcoming genuine adversity. Their approach was holistic, addressing not just the artistic development but the personal and financial stability that allowed artists to create without desperation. "We want to offer you a 3-year fellowship," Dr. Hoffman continued, sliding a thick folder across the small table. "Full financial support for you and your sister, covering all medical expenses, living costs, and educational expenses. In return, you'll spend the next 3 years not just performing, but developing your own artistic voice through composition, recording, and community engagement." Camila opened the folder and found herself staring at numbers that represented more financial security than she had experienced since her parents were alive. But what caught her attention even more was the program's emphasis on using music as a tool for healing and social connection. The fellowship recipients were expected to spend significant time working with underserved communities, using their artistic skills to bring beauty and hope into spaces that rarely had access to such experiences. "There's one more component," Dr. Hoffman added, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "We want you to document your journey, write about the experience of losing and rediscovering your artistic identity. Your story could inspire countless other people who have had to postpone their dreams for family responsibilities or financial necessity." The idea of becoming a spokesperson for abandoned dreams made Camila uncomfortable. She had never seen herself as particularly eloquent or inspiring, and the thought of sharing her personal struggles with a wider audience felt vulnerable in a way that performing did not. On stage she could hide behind the music, letting Chopin or Rachmaninoff speak for her. Writing and speaking about her own experience would require a different kind of courage. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that," Camila said honestly. "There are people who have overcome much greater challenges than mine. I just did what anyone would do for their family." Dr. Hoffman smiled, the expression carrying decades of wisdom about human nature and resilience. "That's exactly why you're the right person. You don't see yourself as heroic or exceptional, which makes your story accessible to people who are facing similar choices. They need to see that ordinary people can make extraordinary sacrifices and still find their way back to their dreams." As they talked through the details of the fellowship, Camila found herself thinking about Sophia, who was at home preparing for her first day of classes at UCLA. Her sister had been accepted into the pre-med program, her own dreams of becoming a doctor fueled by her years as a patient and her desire to help others navigate similar challenges. The irony that both sisters were now pursuing paths that involved healing others was not lost on either of them. The cafe began to fill with the lunch crowd, and their conversation shifted from the formal aspects of the fellowship to more personal territory. Dr. Hoffman spoke about her own journey as a young woman trying to establish herself in the male-dominated world of arts philanthropy, and how her early experiences with discrimination and dismissal had shaped her commitment to supporting artists who faced systemic barriers. The classical music world can be incredibly elitist, Dr. Hoffman admitted, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. There's still this notion that great art can only come from people who have had privileged backgrounds and expensive educations. Your story challenges that assumption in a way that makes some people uncomfortable. Camilla nodded, remembering the mixture of amazement and condescension she had encountered from some audience members after her recent performances. Some people seemed genuinely inspired by her journey, while others appeared to view her success as a charming anomaly, rather than a legitimate artistic achievement. I've noticed that, Camilla said. Some people seem to think my background makes my music more authentic, but others act like I'm some kind of curiosity, like I'm playing dress-up in a world where I don't really belong. That attitude will fade as you establish yourself more firmly in the concert world, Dr. Hoffman assured her, but it's important to understand that your perspective as someone who has lived outside the classical music bubble is actually an asset. You bring experiences and insights that can make even familiar pieces feel fresh and relevant. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. Isabella Chen approached their table hesitantly, clearly uncertain about whether she would be welcome. She had traded her designer gowns for more modest attire, and there was something different about her demeanor that suggested genuine humility rather than performed contrition. I don't want to interrupt, Isabella said, her voice lacking the commanding tone that had once defined her interactions with service staff. I just wanted to thank you both for the invitation to the concert. It was extraordinary. Dr. Hoffman gestured to an empty chair, and Isabella sat down with obvious relief. The past few months had been a period of profound self-reflection for her, triggered initially by her encounter with Camilla but deepened by subsequent experiences that had challenged her assumptions about class worth and human dignity. I've been working with a therapist, Isabella admitted, the confession clearly difficult for someone accustomed to projecting invulnerability. Trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could treat someone the way I treated you that night. It's been illuminating and uncomfortable in equal measure. Camilla studied Isabella's face, noting the absence of the artificial perfection that had once defined her appearance. There were lines around her eyes that suggested she had been sleeping poorly, and her makeup was subtle rather than theatrical. The transformation was striking, though Camilla remained cautious about trusting it. What have you learned? Camilla asked, her tone neutral but not hostile. Isabella considered the question carefully before responding. That I spent most of my adult life using money and status as weapons to maintain distance from my own insecurities. That I confused having power over people with having genuine power over my own life. That I was so afraid of being seen as ordinary, that I convinced myself other people's ordinariness made them lesser than me. The honesty was uncomfortable for everyone at the table, including Isabella herself. But there was something valuable in the discomfort, a recognition that real change required genuine acknowledgement of harm caused rather than superficial apologies designed to restore social equilibrium. I've started volunteering, Isabella continued, at a hospice, helping with their music therapy program. It's been humbling to realize how little I actually knew about suffering, about resilience, about what really matters when everything else is stripped away. Dr. Hoffman looked intrigued. Music therapy, how did you choose that particular form of service? Because of that night, Isabella said, glancing at Camilla. Watching you play, seeing how music could transform not just a room but people's entire understanding of someone's worth and dignity. I realized I had never really listened to music before. I mean, I'd heard it at galas and fundraisers, but I'd never actually listened with my whole being the way everyone did that night. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Camilla had expected when she first saw Isabella approaching their table. They discussed the healing power of music, the ways that art could break down barriers between people, and the responsibility that came with having resources that could support artistic expression. Isabella had been quietly funding several music education programs in underserved communities, but she was careful not to present her philanthropy as evidence that she had fully atoned for her earlier behavior. Instead, she spoke about it as part of an ongoing process of learning to use her privilege constructively rather than destructively. I can't undo what I did that night, Isabella said directly to Camilla as their conversation wound down, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure I never treat anyone that way again and trying to create opportunities for other people whose talents might be overlooked because of their circumstances." When Isabella left, Dr. Hoffman and Camilla sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, processing the unexpected encounter. Finally, Dr. Hoffman spoke. "Redemption is possible for everyone," she said thoughtfully. "But it requires genuine work, genuine change, genuine commitment to being different going forward. What do you think about her transformation?" Camilla considered the question carefully. "I think she's trying. Whether she succeeds long-term remains to be seen, but the effort seems authentic. And I appreciate that she's not expecting forgiveness or friendship from me just because she's doing better work now." Over the following weeks, Camilla threw herself into preparing for the next phase of her career with the intensity that had once characterized her practice sessions at Berkeley. But now her preparation extended beyond technical proficiency to include the emotional and intellectual development that would allow her to create meaningful artistic statements rather than simply reproducing existing repertoire. She began working with a composition teacher, exploring ways to translate her experiences into original musical language. The process was challenging in ways that performing had never been, requiring her to dig deep into memories and emotions that she had spent years trying to compartmentalize. Her first attempts at composition were tentative and self-conscious, but gradually she began to find a voice that was uniquely hers. The piece that emerged from these sessions was a piano sonata in 3 movements that traced the arc of her journey from promising student to struggling caregiver to reborn artist. The first movement captured the joy and ambition of her early musical education, filled with technical flourishes and optimistic harmonies that reflected her youthful certainty about the future. The second movement was darker and more complex, incorporating dissonance and rhythmic instability that reflected the chaos and uncertainty of Sophia's diagnosis and treatment. The final movement began in the same dark territory as the second, but gradually transformed into something that was neither the naive optimism of the first movement nor the despair of the second, but rather a mature acceptance of life's complexity combined with renewed hope. Working on this composition forced Camilla to confront emotions she had avoided for years. There were practice sessions that ended in tears as she worked through musical passages that too closely mirrored the fear and exhaustion she had felt during Sophia's worst days. But there were also moments of transcendence when the music captured something true and meaningful about the human capacity for resilience and renewal. Sophia became her most trusted critic during this process, listening to each revision with the careful attention of someone who had lived through the experiences being translated into music. Her feedback was invaluable not just because of her personal connection to the story, but because her years as a patient had given her a deep appreciation for the healing power of artistic expression. "It sounds like us," Sophia said after hearing the completed sonata for the first time. "Not just our story, but who we became because of our story. It's honest about the hard parts without making them seem romantic or noble, and it acknowledges that we're different people now than we were before, but not broken people." The sonata's premiere was scheduled for 6 months after Camilla's fellowship began, as part of a concert series featuring new works by emerging composers. The venue was smaller and more intimate than the Walt Disney Concert Hall, but the audience included many of the same influential figures who had supported her initial return to performing. As the date approached, Camilla found herself experiencing a different kind of performance anxiety than she had ever felt before. Playing other composers' works, even with her own interpretive choices, involved a certain amount of hiding behind established masterpieces. Performing her own composition would expose her creative voice in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The night of the premiere, Camilla sat in the green room backstage, wearing a simple black dress that Sophia had helped her choose. Her sister had wanted to attend, but midterm exams and a particularly challenging organic chemistry class had made it impossible for her to leave UCLA. Instead, she had sent a long text message that morning filled with encouragement and pride that meant more to Camilla than any review could. Dr. Hoffman knocked on the door and entered with her customary blend of warmth and professionalism. "How are you feeling?" Terrified, Camilla admitted. "When I play Chopin or Rachmaninoff, if something goes wrong, it reflects on my technical skills or my interpretive choices. If something goes wrong tonight, it reflects on me as a person, as an artist, as someone who has something meaningful to contribute to the world." "That's exactly how it should feel," Dr. Hoffman assured her. The vulnerability you're experiencing is proof that this performance matters to you in a way that goes beyond career advancement or public recognition. That vulnerability will come through in your playing and make the music more powerful. As showtime approached, Camilla made her way to the wings and listened to the audience settling into their seats. She could hear familiar voices among the crowd, including Isabella Chen, who had become a regular attendee at her performances. The transformation in their relationship from antagonist and victim to something approaching mutual respect had been gradual but genuine, though Camilla remained clear about the boundaries between forgiveness and friendship. The introduction from the concert hall's artistic director was brief but contextualizing, explaining the personal journey that had informed the composition without sensationalizing Camilla's story or reducing her to a victim narrative. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and encouraging, but Camilla could sense the audience's curiosity about what they were about to hear. She sat at the piano and took a moment to center herself, her hands resting lightly on the keys. This instrument was different from the one she had played during her comeback performances, and she took a few seconds to adjust to its particular touch and response. Then she began the opening measures of her sonata. The first movement unfolded with the confidence and joy that had characterized her early musical education, but even in these optimistic passages there were harmonic choices that suggested depth and sophistication beyond simple happiness. As she played, Camilla found herself remembering not just the external facts of her younger years, but the internal experience of believing that talent and hard work would be sufficient to achieve her dreams. The transition to the second movement was marked by a dramatic shift in both tempo and emotional tone. Here Camilla had incorporated techniques she had learned from studying contemporary composers, using prepared piano effects and extended techniques to create sounds that conventional classical training would never have taught her. The music became fragmented and uncertain, with rhythmic patterns that seemed to constantly shift and melodies that began hopefully but dissolved into dissonance. This section of the sonata was the most challenging to perform, not because of technical difficulty but because of the emotional territory it explored. Camilla had written these passages during her darkest moments of compositional work, when she was forcing herself to confront the anger and resentment she had buried during Sophia's illness. She had been so focused on being strong and supportive that she had never allowed herself to grieve for her lost dreams or feel frustrated with the unfairness of their situation. As she played through the most dissonant and chaotic sections of the second movement, Camilla could feel the audience's discomfort. This was not the beautiful, consoling music that classical audiences often expected from personal narratives. This was raw and uncompromising, refusing to provide easy emotional resolution or suggest that suffering inevitably leads to wisdom and growth. But then gradually, the music began to change. The third movement started in the same dark territory as the second, but slowly introduced elements of the first movement's optimism, transformed and matured by the intervening struggle. The final section of the sonata was neither the naive joy of the opening nor the despair of the middle, but something more complex and ultimately more satisfying: acceptance, resilience, and the hard-won knowledge that beauty and meaning could coexist with uncertainty and loss. When Camilla played the final chord, the silence that followed was profound and extended. She could sense that the audience was processing what they had heard, working through their own emotional responses to music that had demanded genuine engagement rather than passive appreciation. The applause that finally erupted was different from the polite approval that typically followed classical performances. This was recognition not just of technical skill or musical beauty, but of artistic courage and emotional honesty. Several audience members were openly crying, and the standing ovation continued for nearly 10 minutes. But the response that mattered most to Camilla came later, during the reception following the concert. Person after person approached her not to offer generic compliments about her playing, but to share their own stories of interrupted dreams, family responsibilities, and the challenge of rebuilding an identity after life had demanded fundamental changes. An older man told her about giving up his art career to care for aging parents, and how her music had made him consider returning to painting after 15 years away from it. A middle-aged woman spoke about leaving law school when her husband was injured and needed full-time care, and how the sonata had helped her understand that her choice had been both necessary and costly, in ways she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. Dr. Hoffman observed these conversations with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that Camilla's artistic expression was functioning exactly as the Foundation hoped it would, not just as entertainment for elite audiences, but as a catalyst for broader conversations about sacrifice, resilience, and the role of art in processing difficult human experiences. "This is why we do what we do," Dr. Hoffman told Camilla as the evening wound down. "Music at this level isn't just aesthetic pleasure. It's a form of communication that can reach people in places where words fail, that can make them feel less alone in their struggles, and more connected to the broader human experience." As Camilla drove home that night, she reflected on how dramatically her understanding of success had evolved. 5 years earlier, she would have measured her worth as a musician primarily by technical achievement and professional recognition. Now she understood that her greatest strength as an artist came not from her ability to play difficult passages flawlessly, but from her capacity to translate authentic human experience into musical language that could touch other people's hearts and minds. The months that followed brought opportunities that would have been unimaginable during her years as a service worker. Recording contracts, international performance invitations, and collaborations with other artists who were drawn to her unique perspective and compositional voice. But perhaps most importantly, she had established herself as an artist whose work mattered beyond the narrow confines of the classical music world. Her fellowship with the Hoffman Foundation included regular work in communities that rarely had access to professional classical music performances. These concerts, held in community centers, schools and healthcare facilities, became some of Camilla's most meaningful artistic experiences. Playing her sonata for audiences who understood struggle and resilience from their own lives created a different kind of connection than performing for wealthy patrons who viewed classical music primarily as a cultural amenity. It was during one of these community performances that Camilla met Marcus Thompson, a 16-year-old student whose own musical talent was being overshadowed by family financial pressures remarkably similar to what she had experienced. Marcus played jazz piano with a natural gift that reminded Camilla of her younger self, but he was being pressured by his parents to focus on academics and give up music in favor of more practical career preparation. "Music won't pay the bills," Marcus told her after a performance at his high school. "My mom works 2 jobs, and my dad drives for a rideshare company. They think music is a luxury we can't afford." Camilla saw herself in Marcus's frustration and determination, but she also recognized the danger of projecting her own story onto his situation. Every family's circumstances were different, and what had been right for her might not be right for him. But she could offer perspective and resources that might help him navigate his choices more thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something," Camilla said. "If you could have both, if you could pursue music seriously while also preparing for financial stability, would that change how you think about your options?" Over the following months, Camilla worked with Marcus and his family to explore scholarship opportunities, summer programs, and dual degree options that could allow him to develop his musical talents without abandoning practical career preparation. She also connected him with other musicians who had successfully balanced artistic careers with financial responsibility, showing him that the choice between music and security was often a false dichotomy. This mentoring relationship became a model for the community engagement component of Camilla's fellowship. Rather than simply performing for underserved audiences, she began developing workshops and master classes that provided practical guidance for young musicians facing economic barriers. Her own story became a teaching tool, not as inspiration porn about overcoming adversity, but as a realistic example of how talent, hard work and strategic thinking could create opportunities, even in difficult circumstances. The success of these programs attracted attention from other foundations and arts organizations, leading to invitations to speak at conferences and develop curricula for music education programs nationwide. Camilla found herself becoming an advocate for arts access and equity, using her platform to challenge assumptions about who deserved opportunities for artistic development. "Talent doesn't recognize socio-economic boundaries," she told a gathering of arts educators and philanthropists. "But opportunity often does. Our job is to make sure that a young person's potential isn't limited by their family's bank account or their neighborhood zip code." As her fellowship entered its final year, Camilla began planning for the next phase of her career with a confidence and clarity of purpose that her younger self could never have possessed. She had recorded her debut album, which included both her original compositions and her interpretations of classical works chosen specifically for their emotional resonance with her life experience. The recording had received critical acclaim and commercial success, but more importantly, it had established her artistic identity in a way that felt authentic and sustainable. Sophia, now thriving in her pre-med studies and healthy enough to plan for medical school, had become Camilla's closest advisor and most trusted critic. Their relationship had evolved from caregiver and patient to genuine partnership, with each sister supporting the other's dreams while maintaining their deep emotional connection. "You know what's amazing?" Sophia said during one of their regular dinner conversations, "We both found ways to turn our worst experience into something that helps other people. You're using music to heal emotional wounds, and I'm going to use medicine to heal physical ones." The observation was simple but profound, highlighting how their shared trauma had ultimately become a source of strength and purpose rather than permanent limitation. Neither sister would have chosen their path, but both had found ways to create meaning and value from circumstances beyond their control. As Camilla prepared for her fellowship's culminating performance, a full-length solo recital at Carnegie Hall, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The scared young woman who had been humiliated at Isabella Chen's party seemed like a different person, though Camilla understood that every version of herself had been necessary to become who she was now. The Carnegie Hall performance would feature a program that told her complete artistic story, early pieces that had shaped her musical development, works she had learned to love during her years away from performing, and her latest compositions that reflected her current understanding of music's power to heal and connect. But unlike her previous high-profile performances, this recital felt less like a comeback and more like a beginning, the start of an artistic career built on genuine experience rather than youthful ambition alone. The morning of the Carnegie Hall recital dawned crisp and clear in New York City, with autumn light filtering through the hotel room windows where Camilla sat in quiet meditation. She had arrived 3 days early to acclimate herself to the city and the venue, but more importantly, to spend time with the Steinway concert grand that would be her partner for the evening's performance. Each piano had its own personality, and she needed to understand this particular instrument's responsiveness and tonal characteristics before entrusting it with her most personal musical statements. Sophia had flown in from Los Angeles the previous evening, taking her first break from medical school studies to witness what they both understood was a pivotal moment in Camilla's artistic journey. Her sister sat curled in the hotel room's armchair reading through the program notes that would help the audience understand the emotional and biographical context of the evening's repertoire. "I still can't believe you wrote this," Sophia said, holding up the score to Camilla's newest composition, a piece titled Healing Variations that would close the program. "When I read the musical notation, I can actually hear our story in it. The way you've woven themes from childhood lullabies into these complex harmonic progressions, it's like you found a way to make mathematics emotional." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Hoffman entered with her characteristic blend of warmth and professionalism, carrying a small gift wrapped in simple brown paper. Over the past 2 years she had become more than a mentor to Camilla. She had evolved into something resembling an artistic godmother, someone who understood both the practical and spiritual dimensions of a musician's development. "I brought you something that belonged to my grandmother, Dr." Hoffman said, handing Camilla the package. "She was a pianist too, though she never had the opportunities that we've been able to create for you." Inside the wrapping was a small elegant brooch in the shape of a treble clef, crafted from silver that had tarnished to a warm antique patina. The piece was clearly handmade, with tiny imperfections that spoke of careful craftsmanship rather than mass production. "She wore this to every performance," Dr. Hoffman explained. "Not because she was superstitious, but because she said it reminded her that music was both art and craft, something that required both inspiration and technical discipline. I think she would have loved your approach to composition." Camilla fastened the brooch to her black concert dress, feeling the weight of tradition and expectation settling onto her shoulders along with the small piece of jewelry. Tonight's performance represented more than personal achievement, it was a culmination of the Foundation's investment in her artistic development and a demonstration of their philosophy that true artistry emerged from authentic life experience rather than privileged isolation. The afternoon was spent in final preparation at Carnegie Hall itself, where Camilla worked with the piano technician to make minute adjustments to the instrument's touch and tone. She ran through particularly challenging passages from the evening's program, not because she was uncertain about her technical preparation, but because she wanted to feel completely connected to the piano before the audience arrived. The venue's acoustics were legendary, and Camilla spent time understanding how her playing would be shaped and amplified by the hall's architectural features. The sound in Carnegie Hall was warm and enveloping, with a richness that could make even simple melodies feel profound and important. She would need to adjust her touch accordingly, allowing the hall's natural resonance to carry her musical ideas rather than forcing them through excessive physical intensity. As evening approached, the backstage area began to fill with the controlled chaos that preceded any major classical music performance. Ushers prepared programs, sound technicians made final adjustments to recording equipment, and audience members began arriving with the mixture of anticipation and sophistication that characterized Carnegie Hall patrons. Camilla found herself surprisingly calm as she went through her pre-performance routine. The anxiety that had characterized her return to performing had been replaced by a deeper sense of purpose and confidence. She was no longer playing to prove herself worthy of respect or recognition, she was playing to share musical ideas that had emerged from genuine experience and careful artistic consideration. Isabella Chen arrived early and took her seat in the third row, where she could observe Camilla's facial expressions and hand movements without being obvious about her attention. The transformation in Isabella's relationship to classical music had been as dramatic as any other aspect of her personal growth. She now attended concerts not as social obligations or status symbols but as genuine opportunities for artistic and emotional engagement. Seated near Isabella was Marcus Thompson, the young jazz pianist whom Camilla had mentored through his college application process. He had received a full scholarship to study music composition and was already showing promise as both a performer and composer. His presence in the audience represented the ripple effect of Camilla's community engagement work, the way that investing in one artist's development could ultimately benefit many others. Dr. Hoffman took her place in the front row, accompanied by several other Foundation Board members who had supported Camilla's fellowship and were eager to witness the artistic fruits of their investment. But scattered throughout the audience were also people whose connection to Camilla's story was more personal: former patients from the hospital where Sophia had received treatment, members of the communities where Camilla had performed outreach concerts, and music students who had attended her workshops on balancing artistic ambition with practical responsibility. As Camilla prepared to take the stage, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The frightened young woman who had been forced to play piano at Isabella's party would barely recognize the confident artist she had become. But Camilla understood that every version of herself had been necessary for this moment, that her current artistic maturity could not have existed without the years of struggle and sacrifice that had preceded it. The stage manager gave her the 5-minute warning, and Camilla made her way to the wings where she could hear the audience settling into their seats. The program she had chosen represented a complete artistic autobiography, beginning with Bach's Goldberg Variations, the piece that had first made her fall in love with the piano as a child, and concluding with her own healing variations, which transformed simple melodies into complex explorations of resilience and renewal. When her name was announced and she walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and sustained, but Camilla barely heard it. Her attention was focused entirely on the magnificent instrument waiting for her, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights like a dark mirror. She adjusted the bench, tested the pedals, and placed her hands on the keys with the reverence of someone approaching a sacred ritual. The opening of the Goldberg Variations emerged from the piano with crystalline clarity, each note perfectly balanced and weighted. But this was not the academic interpretation that might have characterized her student years. This performance was informed by decades of life experience, by an understanding of music's power to heal and transform that could only come from having lived through genuine hardship and emerged stronger. As she moved through the theme and its first few variations, Camilla felt herself entering the meditative state that characterized her best performances. The audience, the venue, even her own physical presence seemed to fade away, leaving only the music and the instrument, and the mysterious process by which human emotion could be translated into organized sound. The Bach was followed by Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she had been working on when Sophia's diagnosis had interrupted her studies. Playing it now, with full technical command and emotional understanding, felt like reclaiming a part of herself that had been lost rather than abandoned. The music's dramatic contrasts and technical challenges had once intimidated her, now they felt like old friends, familiar and welcoming. But it was her own compositions that truly revealed the artist Camila had become. The healing variations began with a simple melody that she had hummed to Sophia during chemotherapy sessions, a tune that had emerged unconsciously as a way of providing comfort in moments when words were inadequate. Over the course of 12 variations, this simple melody was transformed through different harmonic contexts, rhythmic treatments, and textural approaches that explored themes of illness and recovery, despair and hope, separation and reunion. The fourth variation was particularly moving, written in a minor key with dissonant harmonies that captured the fear and uncertainty of Sophia's worst days. But it was followed immediately by a variation that used the same melodic material in a major key, with gentle flowing accompaniment that suggested the gradual return of health and optimism. As Camila played these deeply personal pieces, she could sense the audience's complete attention and emotional engagement. This was not the polite appreciation that often characterized classical concerts, but genuine connection to music that spoke directly about universal human experiences of love, loss, and renewal. The final variation brought together all the thematic material from the previous movements, weaving the simple original melody through complex harmonic progressions that suggested both resolution and ongoing journey. The piece concluded not with triumphant celebration but with quiet acceptance and continued hope, acknowledging that healing was an ongoing process rather than a destination. When the last notes faded into silence, the audience's response was immediate and overwhelming. The standing ovation continued for nearly 15 minutes, with audience members calling for encores and expressing appreciation not just for technical excellence, but for artistic courage and emotional honesty. Camila played 3 encores, each one chosen spontaneously based on her sense of what the audience needed to hear. The final encore was Clair de Lune, the piece that had marked her return to performing at Isabella's party. But tonight it sounded different, infused with the confidence and artistic maturity that had developed over the intervening years. As she finally left the stage, Camila was greeted by Sophia, Dr. Hoffman, and a crowd of supporters who had witnessed not just a recital, but a transformation. The reviews that would appear in the following days would praise her technical command and interpretive intelligence, but the people who had been in the hall that night understood that they had experienced something more significant, the emergence of an artist whose work would continue to matter long after the applause had faded. The reception following the concert was held in Carnegie Hall's elegant Rosenblum Family Gallery, where audience members mingled with artists and supporters in an atmosphere of genuine celebration. Camila found herself at the center of conversations that ranged from specific musical observations to broader discussions about art's role in processing trauma and facilitating healing. Isabella approached her near the end of the evening, carrying a small envelope that she presented with obvious nervousness. "I wrote you a letter," she said simply. "Not an apology exactly, because I think we've moved past that, more like a thank you note for teaching me how to listen." Marcus Thompson spent nearly an hour discussing composition techniques with Camila, his excitement about his own artistic development evident in every question and observation. She could see in his enthusiasm the same passion that had once driven her own musical studies, but tempered now by a more realistic understanding of the challenges and rewards of an artistic career. Dr. Kaufman watched these interactions with obvious satisfaction, recognizing that Camila had evolved not just as a performer and composer, but as a mentor and advocate for other artists facing similar challenges. The foundation's investment had produced dividends that extended far beyond a single artist's career success. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, Camila found herself standing alone on the stage where she had just completed the most important performance of her life. The hall was empty now, except for cleaning crew members who were quietly restoring the space to its pristine condition. Sophia joined her on the stage, and the sisters stood together in comfortable silence, processing the significance of the moment. They had both come so far from the frightened young women who had faced Sophia's diagnosis with determination but little hope. "What's next?" Sophia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be both ambitious and meaningful. Camila looked out at the empty seats, imagining all the other stories and dreams that would be shared in this space in years to come. Her own journey was far from complete, but she had established herself as an artist whose work mattered, whose voice contributed something valuable to the ongoing conversation between musicians and audiences about what it means to be human. More music, Camila said simply, more healing, more connection between people who think they're different but discover they're fundamentally the same. The Carnegie Hall recital marked the end of Camila's fellowship with the Hoffman Foundation, but it also represented the beginning of an artistic career that would span decades and touch countless lives. She had learned that the most powerful music emerged not from privilege or perfection, but from authentic engagement with life's complexities and challenges. In the months that followed, Camila would establish her own foundation to support musicians facing family medical crises. She would compose a piano concerto that would be performed by major orchestras worldwide. She would continue her community engagement work, always remembering that her greatest responsibility as an artist was to create connections and provide healing through the universal language of music. But tonight, standing on the stage where she had just shared her most personal artistic statements with 2,000 strangers, who had become temporary companions in the journey of human experience, Camila felt complete satisfaction. She had found her way back to music, but more importantly, she had discovered that music had never really left her. It had simply been waiting for her to mature enough to understand its true purpose and power. The scared young woman who had spilled champagne on Isabella Chen's dress had become a confident artist whose work would outlive any temporary embarrassment or social humiliation. The transformation was complete, not because she had escaped her circumstances, but because she had learned to transform them into art that could help others navigate their own challenges with greater courage and hope. As Camila and Sophia finally left the stage and walked out into the New York night, they carried with them the knowledge that dreams deferred were not necessarily dreams destroyed, and that sometimes the most meaningful achievements emerged not from easy success, but from the hard-won wisdom that came through surviving adversity with grace and determination intact. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.